Good evening, everyone. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Um, many thanks for registering for today's webinar. We will be looking at the biomechanical and technical overview for the triple jump. We hope this will take no longer than 90 minutes. Hopefully we'll have some time right at the end for some Q&A. So, presenting today with me is my long-term friend and colleague, Aston Moore. Aston and I have been friends for nearly 50 years. It's been worse than a prison sentence, but there you go. We competed together in the junior ranks and senior ranks and attended most of the camps in the 70s and late 90s, where we both learned most of the coaching. Looking at Aston's credentials, so if you can go on to the next slide. We jumped, yeah. So looking at Aston's credentials is quite awesome. Former British record holder, an Olympian, bronze medal in the Commonwealth Games, bronze medal at the 1981 European Indoor Championships. Aston, did you win the World European Juniors as well?
European, yeah, is it not there?
No, see? Works for the National Institute Performance, senior coach for horizontal jump, UK level 4 performance coach. He's had some notable and significant successes with his coaching. Asher Hansen, notably, 15-16, Phillips, 17-18, Nathan Douglas, 17-64, Kimberley, 14-68, Kelly, combined events, 6,561, and 679 in the long jump. And then you've got Julian Reed, 1698.
You don't have to do them all, Frank.
I'm doing it because it sounds good. And then you got Ben Williams, who you just took on recently, and then you're doing all the para stuff as well. So that's really good. For myself, I've been in the sport for a similar time. I started coaching in 1982. I've been very fortunate that I actually had a full-time job working for BT. I did that for a number of years, 38 odd years, and I think I've been quite lucky, successful at coaching some decent athletes. You can actually see some of the names at the bottom of where my name is. Very fortunate. Again, one of the first athlete I started coaching went to the Olympics in 1988. That was the Seoul Olympics, and then Francis Ajipong went to the 92 Olympics, and that's how it started. Okay, next slide, please, if you could do that for me, because I've got a small screen. So the triple jump was, as has been said, not always a hop, step and jump. The origin of the triple jump are very obscure, if I remember it rightly, but it may be related to the ancient children game hopscotch? Yeah, remember it? Hopscotch, which kids do nowadays at playgrounds at schools. A good learning point, a good learning place to spot some talent. It has been in the modern games event since the first Olympics, which was 1896. Those games, there were 2 hops were used, but 1 hop was used at the Olympic Games thereafter. Also, just give you a brief history, the standing triple jump was contested only in 1900 and 1904 Olympics. and then it changed to the hop, step, and jump as we all know it today. There's been some significant barriers. 16 meters was a Japanese guy called Attoh, who set a world record back in 1936. So it was quite a significant leap in those days. And then we had Joseph Smith back in 1960, who jumped 17:03 to win the gold in Rome in 64. And then, no, tell a lie, was it 1961? Have I got it? Yeah, 1960 won the gold and then won it again in Tokyo in 64. So we've been blessed. We've been blessed that we've got the 18-meter guy on our doorstep, Jonathan Edwards, who did that in 1995 in Gothenburg. And I remember being in the stadium watching it when he did it, which is the current record. He jumped 18:29. We knew it was coming because he did Europa Cup and jumped 18:43, windy. So we suspected he was going to have a big one at the World Championships in Gothenburg. But there's been some notable performances and performers. The Russian Viktor Saniev, who dominated the event from the 70s. He won Olympic Games, including 3 medals, 3 gold medals, and 1 silver. So he did 68, 72, 76, and then did silver in 80. The women's event, however, had not started. It only just started back in sort of early 80s. So the ladies were practicing, trying to get some triple jumping done. So the IAAF introduced that into the World Championships indoors in Seville in 1991, I believe, where it was a non-championship contest. There was a Japanese lady who jumped 14:04 at that time, and then eventually went to jump 14:54, officially ratified by the IAAF in 1990. And then we had some enormous improvements from loads of the guys from the Soviet Union, jumping close to 15, Berikova, people like that. And then came the 95 World Championships, again in Gothenburg. I was there to witness Ines Kravat's jump 15:50. However, I'd like to qualify this. Kravat's was banned for 3 months for use in stimulus, and then eventually was suspended for, I think in 2000, was suspended for a couple of years. So there she is. Very, very rangy, made it look really, really easy. I felt with legs like that, you know, she ought to be jumping 16 meters, but we'll go through that again. And I think sometime in the future, we can then analyze the actual jump. Yeah, 15:50. Brilliant.
Edwards ei tyytynyt vielä tähän huipputulokseen.
Ja hurja hyppy jälleen, hän parantaa.
Edwards ei tyytynyt vielä tähän huipputulokseen.
Ja hurja hyppy jälleen, hän parantaa.
What a week that was. That was really good, and it was good to have been in the stadium to have witnessed some distances. 2 world records, women, and they're still current, those world records. So can you flick to the next slide, please, for me? So athlete development, what do we mean? Are they tactically sound? Do they freeze when they come into an arena which is full of people? Do they need some physiology before they enter that arena? Do they have the total competitive skill to dominate and produce decent performance? This will all be, this is all dependent on how the coach conveys the athletes a winning ethos. It is something that Aston's going to talk about later on. So we look at technical acquisition. Where is the body before takeoff? Where's the body after takeoff? Where's the legs at the end? Where's the trail leg doing the phases? What's happening doing the landing? All that we're going to pick up later on. Aston's going to touch on that. You know, where we go this through with these biomechanical. If you watch the movements, the physical side of it, which is the movement being very, very graceful. If you watch, we just watched Jonathan and Cravat's. It's very, very efficient movement of each phase, and it's key to, you know, attaining those good performances. And it actually aids consistency. But there's a stage before we get there. It's all the training, the strength work you have to do. And to be honest with you, the event is not for faint-hearted athletes. The body needs to be resilient to withstand the forces generated during the phases upon impact. We talk about maybe metabolism. We all know about ATP, which perhaps Aston will touch on later on, but ATP is the energy of currency, and we all know what that does, but we'll touch on that another day. I don't really want to go too much into it because Aston's going to talk about a lot of this stuff. So as has been said by Victor there, technique without strength is useless, and it works the other way around as well. Strength without technique is also useless. So you need a combination of both. But Aston, the behavior, the mental behavior, this all can be learned from the coach, and it all depends how the coach is willing to push that environment to the athlete. So Aston, I'll hand this over to you to rock the boat.
Okay, thanks very much, Frank.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just to pick up on some of that sort of some of the behavioral stuff, because the athlete has to, of course, right, they must develop their mental capacity to train and actually to train those behavioral aspects, which ultimately will help them make decisions in terms of pressures of life and competition, as well as training. And so, in a sense, yeah, we need to just pick up on a little bit more of those behavioral sort of aspects. And it's spending a little bit more time actually talking about those things. And I do want to just spend just a little bit more time talking about that, because it's, you know, the mental capacity of the athlete, ultimately, right, something that will either help them or sabotage their sporting success. So we all probably know of young athletes who had the physical capabilities to be the best in the world, but their attitude and commitment or discipline to training wasn't what it should be. For example, they don't turn up, they turn up to training late. They don't do the added extras in terms of the homework to bulletproof their bodies against the event, and they end up sabotaging their sporting efforts because of that. And in my opinion, the best time to develop these mental traits are in those early years and when athletes are teenagers. And in truth, I think, as Frank sort of touched on a little bit, a well-designed training program and a good coaching philosophy will normally go a long way in helping young athletes to develop many of the traits that we just identified. But one of the roles of the coach, we're talking about a lot of the biomechanical things at the moment, but one of the roles of the coach is to recognize any behavioral traits which limits the athlete, and then to design and help them to develop a strategy to overcome and improve those limiting traits. So, at the bottom of the slide there, it says, where are your rep sets to develop these behavioral traits? And it's part of the overall training program. And certainly that's what Darren suggested when he talked about this in the long jump. And I'm certainly reiterating that a little bit here, that, it's not just the physical. As coaches, right, we have to deal with some of those mental aspects as well. Now, I suspect, as I say, everybody's sort of here to actually talk about, the biomechanical and the technical bit. So let's get into that a little bit. Biomechanical principles underpin all technical models. Yeah, and that's just full stop. I mean, I can pretty much say that and just switch off at this point. But biomechanics is about studying how human bodies move and apply force as it relates to an event. And it allows us to identify models of good practice, which leads to success in an event. And so I'm going to touch on an area that maybe might seem as though I'm actually talking against biomechanics, but I'm not, because mechanics only, the biomechanics, right, only tells us what happens at a moment in time. But the stuff that we're going to be talking about, when I talk about good models of, or should I say, successful models, we know that these things have been tested on hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of athletes, and so the idea that I'm giving you here tonight is not from one study. It's a study of elite triple jumpers over many years. And this is all distilled down into these good practices that we're going to talk about. So if we can, for instance, Darren, if we can actually play Christian Malcolm and Christian Taylor and Jonathan Edwards. Let's do Christian first. So yep, that'll be. If we look at Christian and Jonathan Edwards, we can see that they're both pretty much the same type of athletes. They've both done, one jumped 18:29, the other one's jumped 18:21. So if you can show Jonathan Edwards again, please, Darren.
Edwards ei tyytynyt vielä tähän huipputulokseen.
Ja hurja hyppy jälleen, hän parantaa.
Okay, then, right. So we can clearly see, right, that in terms of the forces that they're actually applying, each of those athletes are they're within 9 centimeters of each other. So technically, right, we know that they're pretty similar as well. But if we look at them, right, we can actually tell, right, that they're different athletes. Yeah, one guy is more elastic, the other guy is a little bit more what I would call reactive. And we can probably talk about which one is which and a little bit later on. But that's where the differences are with them. That one, where we actually work with the athlete is that the artistry of the coach actually takes over at some point, and the physical capability of the athletes come into play, and we see style and technique overlaying onto some of these biomechanical principles. But let me be clear. I believe that the coach is both a scientist and an artist. Some of us come at it from the science and we learn the art, and some of it come as artists first, and then we learn the science on top of that, right? But we need to be both. So the journey that we're going to take tonight is it's mostly about the how-tos and what should happen, rather than how we actually get there. So very quickly, before we actually get into all the technical stuff, we need to actually talk about what drives the athlete. Because going back to the quote that Victor Creer that Frank mentioned about technique, without strength is useless. What Victor Career was referring to is the engine which drives the athlete. Collectively, we call those biomotor abilities. And similar to Liam Nielsen in Taken, the triple jumper requires a special set of skills and attributes if they're going to be successful at the event. Yeah, they need good sprinting speed on the approach. Horizontal jumpers, in a lot of ways, are probably failed sprinters, but they have those sprinting abilities, and they need that speed on the runway. I mean, and we know that maybe on the female side, some of them do come at it from a high jump perspective, and we've known very, very successful triple jumpers, both male and female, who do come from high jumping rather than the sprint fraternity. They also need strength, and we talk about maximum strength here, but in particular, we're talking about reactive strength. Yeah, the ability to absorb forces and generate forces. They also need a high degree of movement coordination. Yeah, in a lot of sense, right? Once the athlete take over and rotation start to act upon the body, the athlete needs a high degree of an ability to coordinate their actions and to hold their balances. And one of the things that I used to use as a coach way back when I was looking for young triple jumpers was basically, right, I would show them the triple jump once and then say, now do it. And the guys who actually basically picked it up first time around, I'm saying, okay, you guys, right, I want you guys over one side, because I know that these are the guys, right, who immediately pick up on the coordination and the rhythm of the event. So we talked about rhythm as well. They need rhythm. The triple jump is a rhythmical event. Yeah, when we listen to the hop, step, and jump, we're looking for balance in terms of sound. But equally, right, it also needs rhythm as well as timing. Yeah, the timing to apply forces or the impulse on the ground from phase to phase and stuff like that, right? So there's a high degree of rhythm that goes with that. The triple jump also needs great flexibility because, again, they need good range of movements to apply those forces. So we talk about strength, but strength over a short range don't give you a lot of power. And so if that's a limiting factor, right, then the triple jumper needs to develop that as well. Adding a little bit of metabolic work for you and me, right? It's basically calling specific fitness, and the triple jumper is pretty much good to go at that point. Is there anything you want to jump in on, Frank, at any point?
No. Just, I mean, most of you only have to watch the Cuban triple jumpers, and they have rhythm. If you watch, and that goes to the event. There are many Cuban triple jumpers that do this day in and day out. So yeah, you definitely need the flexibility. The rhythm is so key. When you listen to a triple jump that goes well, you just hear da da da, and you could listen to that all day long. Yeah.
Okay. So what I'm going to talk about now, I'm actually going to give you an overview of the triple jump. Darren, don't worry about running these slides. I mean, there are two videos there, or should I say there's two slides, one of Christian and one of Rojas, and these are the current guys who are doing it in the event. And so, we looked at Jonathan and we looked at Kravats, and I bring you right up to date now. These are the guys, these are the movers and shakers in the event. And I'm very quickly going to run through, of course, right, you guys already know triple jump, but I'm going to run through it all very, very quickly. So let's look at that in brief. Right, so the aim of the triple jump is to achieve the furthest possible distance with 3 single leg jumps in a prescribed order. And that could be left, right, or right, left. It depends on which leg they take off on the hop and stuff like that. Now, because there's a need for balance and control over the 3 phases, the hop and steps are performed with sub-maximal efforts. And only the jump phase is performed maximally. Now, to achieve their aim, the triple jumper need to have a precise approach run with an optimal, almost maximum speed with which they produce kinetic energy. And just to sort of, again, just go through a little bit more about the broad overview of the triple jump. You can see a slide there of basically how the triple jump is measured, from a biomechanical perspective. And so at the elite level, the takeoff board is positioned at precisely 13 meters for men and 11 meters for women to the sandpit. The official distance jumped in the triple jump is measured from the front edge of the board, basically from the plasticine, from the beginning of the plasticine, from the front edge of the board. So the first identifiable mark in the sand. And if I had a pointer, I could show you where that is, but I'm sure you guys can actually see what's up on the screen then. Now, the sum of the official distance and the distance conceded, which basically what that means is the point at which the jumper actually took off from, that gives us the so-called, what the biomechanists call an effective distance, which is really just a theoretical point of view, so that the biomechanists can always say that, well, if they'd been closer to the plasticine, right, they would have jumped X, for instance. Yeah, so the official distance is basically the distance that's used in competition, and we need not really go through any more than that.
Just to add, Aston.
Go on.
So we're all aware that you can only have international.
Do you want me to go back to the slide, Frank?
Yeah, you can do. Yeah. So you can only have international meetings with a 13-meter and 11-meter board. It's not deemed internationally if you have a 10 or 12-meter board. This is according to the IAAF. But yeah, surely there are 10 and 11 and 12-meter boards in most countries.
Yeah, and you've got to cater for the youngsters as well within that. But at the international level, if you qualify to go to the World Championships, Olympics, or European, right, then it's basically going to be 11 and 13.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Right, so let's get a little bit into the biomechanics, the mechanics of it all. So the whole point of every takeoff in the triple jump is about the optimization of the following three parameters. Yeah, the height of takeoff, vertical velocity, horizontal velocity. Those three, if you get them right, will give you the resultant velocity and the projection angle, which basically is the angle of takeoff. And I've colored 4 and 5 red, and we can see how that relates to the figure on the screen there. The final two parameters, which affect, they're the ones that affect the distance traveled in the triple jump. Yeah, and so that's just a very broad, very sort of matter-of-fact stating of, what affects. Now, I say that because of this model that we're now looking at. Right, in fact, I'll go back to the previous slide. So it could be that as coaches, right, all of these 5 points that I've just put up there, right, just shouting at you like crazy. Yeah, which one do you work with? When you're looking to improve a triple jump, a triple jumper. And this is how you get to it. It says, just because how we make the decision as to where to concentrate our coaching efforts. This model helps us, and it's called a deterministic model. This one is for horizontal jumps generally, but we'll see how that fits into a triple jump a little bit later on. And it helps us to identify which parameters affects which outcome. Now, the important thing to recognize is that it's mostly about a cause and effect relationship between these parameters. So if you can actually get in on the slide a little bit, but we can't. If we look at, and briefly, you can look at this in your own time. If you look at maybe the flight phase, right? We know that that's affected by the relative height of takeoff of the center of mass, the speed of takeoff, and the angle of takeoff. We'll forget about air resistance for the moment. And if we want to know what affects the relative height at takeoff, right, then we can look at the determinants below that, and we can actually see that that's takeoff by touchdown and takeoff heights of the center of mass as well. So what that does as coaches, right, it actually helps us to actually pinpoint, okay, if I need to work on a particular area with this athlete, these are the things that affect those areas. These are these are what determine that action to be good or bad in a sense. So if we bring that a little bit more into a triple jump perspective, if we focus on the deterministic model related to the triple jump, we can see that all the parameters I talked about, which is the whatever distance that we're looking for in the triple jump, yeah, we see that that's affected by the takeoff distance, the flight distance, and the landing distance. And that could be the hop, the step, or the jump. It doesn't matter. Yeah, so for the triple jump, right, all of those things happen 3 times over. All things being equal, the flight distance is a result of the takeoff and the landing characteristics. However, what happens in the moment between the touchdown and the takeoff is some of the most critical moments within all of jumping in a sense, right? But super, super critical when it comes to triple jumping, because that happens 3 times over. But before we get into that, right, none of that is any more crucial than the takeoff velocity. And so we're going to come back to the slide. We're going to come back and argue the case here when we look at this athlete. We look at the inverted triangle between between the touchdown and the takeoff. Those are areas that we're going to look at later on, but not before we actually go through something that's really, really critical as far as triple jumping or just horizontal jumping is concerned. Because without doubt, speed at takeoff is the most important element in horizontal jumping. Because the kinetic energy is produced via the speed of the approach run. Therefore, the goal of the jumper is to convert this energy into height and distance. And as we can see at the elite level, triple jump, the triple jump sort of run consists of 18 to 21 strides, maybe over 30 to 45 meters. Now, we know that it can be less than that because Rojas in the World Championships in London, she does a little bit of a hop and a skip and a little running, and I'm sure when I counted those strides, it was no more than 14 strides. Yeah, so it can be less, and women generally it's less than men in terms of their stride. Would I be right in thinking that, Frank, or not?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So we're giving a generality here. Right? We're probably more a little bit more specific to male, but understand that the female athlete will probably do slightly less, maybe 16 to 18 rather than 18 to 21 strides. Now, equally, we know that elite jumpers can achieve speeds of around about 10 meters per second for men and 9 meters per second for women as they approach that first takeoff. Yeah, and this slide actually doesn't quite do it for me, and I don't know whether or not it. Yeah, okay, I can come back to another slide a little bit later on if we need to just clarify that. These are some results that was taken from London, and for whatever reason, right, London stats just seem to be a little bit slightly skewed on some of the other stats that we've seen at other World Championships. But here, right, we're still sort of seeing certainly second last stride out. Someone like Christian is doing 10 meters per second and increasing that onto the last stride into takeoff. But generally, we'll probably see maybe 6 of the top 8 jumpers will be doing 10 meters per second on that last stride, if not better. And for women, right, you probably see a similar thing. Now, there are some exceptions to the rule in terms of whether or not elite jumpers can jump elite distances under the speeds that we're just talking about. Because again, right, we know that the the exceptions to the rule is probably related to the strength type jumpers. So we know, for instance, right, Cubans who are very, very strong athletes, they will jump, and we're talking about men here, in excess of 1750 with a 9.8 meters per second. Probably nowhere else, yeah, we will probably see those someone jumping that far over 17 meters with such with the type of approach speed that we're talking about there. So there are some exceptions to the rule, but generally, yeah, jumpers need to be minimally 10 meters per second going into that first phase, which is the hop, and certainly maybe 9.2 meters per second for women going into hop for them. You want to come in there, Frank?
Yeah, I was going to say, just to add, the Russians, Soviets back in the 70s, 80s, when they were, and 90s, when they were really jumping well, were producing about 9.5 meters per second on the runway. They weren't any faster than the Americans or the Europeans. So they were predominantly strength jumpers.
Yeah. Yeah, and so if you have great strength, right, then you can overcome some of these things, right? But ultimately, right, you're limited. Certainly nowadays, right, the strength jumper may occasionally get onto the rostrum, but they won't do so on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Yeah, they normally need that 10 meters per second and better. Yeah, just to continue the conversation about the takeoff velocity, I want to look at that, how that relates to the hop, the step, and the jump, because the distance in each one of these. The distance jumped in the triple jump is made up of the sum of the three individual phases. Now, these separate distances are strongly dependent on the available horizontal velocity in each of those takeoffs. So we can see on the screen here that jumpers, if I move my, I've got my thing right where the thing is there. Yeah, so if we can actually see here, right? So at a hop takeoff, we can see the speed for Clay and Taylor and Devora. We can see that their speed actually fall at each of those initial takeoff from the hop, the step, and the jump. And generally, right, it's accepted that athletes will lose around about. I mean, we used to sort of, it averages out maybe a little bit over 1 meter per second through the phases. And generally, right, it'll be something like 0.809 for the hop, and then 1.2 for the step, and then maybe 2 meters per second. They will lose again for the jump phase, but it averages out roughly at about 1.5 meters per second. But that's important because, again, yeah, if you start off with a low velocity, you are going to lose speed as you go. And there's nothing that you can do about it. It's just physics. Which leads us nicely into the reasons why that happens. Now, the phase prior to, we're now going back to our model back here. We're going back to this now. We're going back to our inverted triangle. The phase prior to the takeoff in each phase of the triple jump is normally referred to as the touchdown and support phase. Now, these moments, as I said, right, are primarily about the conservation of horizontal velocity as well as the development of vertical velocity. Now, good jumping technique involves optimum landing position, and these positions have they have a couple of elements within that. The first of that is the landing angle, and this is where I'm talking. This is a bit that I want to touch on just very, very briefly. So the landing angle at touchdown. The jumper prepares for takeoff by sticking their legs ahead of their center of mass. That's basically how they do it. Now, however, too far ahead of the center of mass mean that there's going to be a lot of braking forces. So it means that you're going to lose a lot of horizontal velocity if the leg is too far in front. Too close, and the jumper risk over rotation. And if you just remember, if you look at remind ourselves of Jonathan Edwards jumping his world record. And Jonathan was very, very quick off the ground, but also very, very close in terms of his touchdown angles. You could see throughout the phases, he was literally fighting forward rotation. He was basically literally on the line of controlling his rotations in the triple jump. But too close, right? And yeah, the athlete loses distance because they over rotate and they have to put their foot down. If they don't put their foot down, then they land on their heads, basically. Yeah, so the leg plant angle needs to be optimal. Now, if we take a general view, all phases will be between the 65 to 70 degree angle and that angle relates to the horizontal. Or you might actually see that written as 20 to 25 degrees. Now, in truth, what would happen, right, that the hop takeoff and the step takeoff are probably going to be closer in terms of their angle, and close mean so the higher the angle in terms of this, right, the closer the angle, whereas the jump angle will be much further out, and that'll be much more like 65 degrees. And there are reasons why that happened, and we'll come back to those reasons a little bit later on. And for those of you who know triple jumping, it's fairly obvious as to why that is, especially when I talked about that the first two phases are submaximal and the last phase is maximal. But we can come back to those things a little bit later on if folks want to field some questions in and around that. To continue the conversations in and around leg plant, the next part of that conservation of momentum is something that we term as maximum knee flexion, or in some, and I think at the top of the screen here, it's down as minimum knee flexion. The first term that I heard about was maximum knee flexion. I'm going to stick with that one. And basically, maximum knee flexion, it's basically the moment of support where compression of it's basically called a compression phase. So immediately after touchdown, the athlete legs begins to bend or flex at the knees. The extent to which the leg bends is referred to as maximum knee flexion. And this angle needs to be as small as possible. And as the slide suggests, right, the hop, we normally refer to that as being about 140 degrees. The step and the jump is going to be in and around about 125 degrees. Now, there is an anomaly when it comes to women. Because if you look at the slide, we can actually see that for whatever reason, in general, if we look at the step for men, we can see that the women angles are larger. Larger meaning that they're straighter, because if you imagine the leg on the floor at the knees, 180 degrees is a straight leg. So the higher that number is, yeah, the straighter the leg is. Now, if you look at the guys, right, the guys are into the 130s, 120s. Yeah, and the women are mostly, or certainly high 30s and definitely into the 40s. And to probably to my shame, I only realized this once I started to develop the slide, because I just assumed, right, that men and women pretty much were going through the similar angles. But we can see some ideas here, right, where the female athlete start to move a little bit away from what the men do, and the discussion that we can and have around that can be very, very interesting. I've got my own theories about why that is. But as I say, I found this, what I would call an anomaly, whilst I was looking at the London stats. So I then went back to a few other stats, and I went to the Daegu stats over here, and the stats over here, which is with the blue. They're from the World Championships in Berlin, and again, it shows that the women are higher than the guys in general. So there's something going on here, right, that we probably need to look at. Either it's the way that the women's event is evolving, or it maybe points us in a direction where women's event should be evolving to. Now, why it's an anomaly for me, right, is that we know that women are generally weaker than men when it comes to leg strength in general. And we also know that their reactive abilities aren't quite the same as men. So I would have thought that their angle would be at least the same as men, if not, if not deeper. But that's not what the stats are suggesting. So so that's something for us to look into and maybe have a discussion about. Right, the combination of the two slides before, which is the touchdown and maximum knee flexion, gives us a combination of sort of optimum leg plant. It tells us what we need to do in terms of what happens on the ground between the leg plant and the takeoff itself. So the time spent on the floor between touchdown to takeoff is an important element. And we know that that happens in the stepwise phase. And we talked about that a little bit earlier, where we can actually see that that for both male and female, and these are stats that are from the World Championships in Berlin, we can actually see that the touchdown and the contact time for the hop, step, and jump for each of the athlete actually increases through the phases. And these are the numbers that we're having to work with. But again, it tells us the time in which the athlete has to switch from accepting a load to developing force for the next part of basically for the takeoff. Now, just to go back to the slide, we're talking about conservation of momentum here. And so because the athlete's actually on the floor, we know that they're losing force, we know that they're losing time, we know that they're losing speed. Yeah, and speed, as we talked about, right, is massively important to each of those takeoff distances and flights. So how do we overcome that? How would the athlete overcome that? Because the only thing that we know that we can discuss about this is that we know that there's a negative effect associated with each of the touchdowns. And if the jumper did nothing at all, each of the touchdowns, right, they're going to lose speed. There's a technique that the athlete uses or try to employ to minimize speed loss. And basically, if we look at the slide, right, what the slide actually talks about, right, is that in each touchdown, the jumper must try to pull the takeoff foot as close as possible to under their body. And that's generally referred to as active or gripping landing. Some of us might know it as pouring and stuff like that. Now, James Hay sort of did a study which actually helped us just to understand this. And as we can see, right, the athlete, if we look at the arrow, the athlete is actually traveling at a particular speed, a particular velocity in meters per second. And we can see here that the leg is also traveling in relation to the body, is traveling. If we were to sum both these numbers relate to 10.2. But we can see that the backward movement of the leg actually has a higher velocity than the forward movement of the leg. And that suggests to us, right, that what is something called negative foot speed. Yeah, so the foot is traveling backwards faster than the whole body. Well, not the whole body, but proportionally, the leg is traveling forward, as it were. And that's how the athlete performs that gripping, active landing that we talked about. All athletes do that. And if they don't, the distance is suffer in the triple jump.
Yeah.
You want to jump in there, Frank?
No. So it's another name for it is we refer to it as out and back. So the foot can go out as far as you want it, but it has to come back, because if it doesn't come back, you start blocking.
Yeah. And it has to come back. Yeah, you're right. It has to come back. And it also has to come back and land at that angle.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it all relates. You know, it all relates. It all sort of fits together. So within the general conversation about conservation of speed, right, we've got to also we need to talk about distribution of efforts from phase to phase. Yeah. So the distance covered in each phase is referred to as the phase distribution of effort or phase ratio. Yeah, they're different. They're slightly different terminologies, right? But if we look at it, you know, it pretty much says exactly that. Now, the distance covered in each phase is referred to as I said, as the phase ratio, and they're different for each jumper, but it must be within certain bandwidth. And I'm going to actually, you know, just try and just tighten up on what I mean by bandwidth. So too much emphasis on either the hop or the step will always decrease the distance in the subsequent phase. So, for instance, if the athlete overdoes the hop, goes maximal in a hop, we know that the step is gonna suffer. Yeah, and subsequently the jump will. Equally, if the athlete also overdoes the step distance, then the jump phase will suffer. And so for every athlete, right, there's an optimization. There's always a playing around with what is the best ratio for me to use here based on the characteristics that I have. Whether or not I'm speed, strength, or any other type jumper that we want to talk about. Yeah, and that's been mostly down to the individual characteristics of the athlete. Now, at one point, right, they try to classify. They used to classify it based on, as we see here, right. We're talking about the Japanese technique, we talk about the Russian technique, we talk about the Polish technique, and literally, right, that was literally down to that classified because the jumper of the day happens to be a Japanese or something. So during the 1930s, right, when the Japanese won, I think, 2 Olympic titles, yeah, then the technique that everybody referred to that they were employing was the Japanese technique. When the Russian came and started to dominate a little bit, yeah, then everyone referred to that as the Russian technique. And then when Schmidt came along and broke 17 meters, yeah, then they referred to his technique as the Polish technique. So it was all related to the country of the dominant athlete of the age. James Hay, he just looked into, how can we actually do this? How can we actually get something that's a little bit more standard than that? And he came up with his way of looking at jumpers technique. And it's basically it's the method now that's accepted all over the world, which is basically looking at, an athlete is either a hop dominant athlete, jump dominant athlete, or they're balanced. And they're hop dominant because the hop is 2% or more, than the next longest phase, which is usually the jump phase. Yeah, if the jump phase is 2% more than the next longest phase, which again usually is probably the hop, then they would jump dominant. And if it was less than 2 meters either end, right, then they just call that a balanced jump. And so if for those of you who are interested in things like this, and I tend not to be, because you don't really want to draw any emphasis here, right? We can see that certainly from London, there's a lot of balanced jumpers in that final. But in both the gold medal tend to be jump dominant. Now you can jump all over that if you want, but I just wouldn't for the moment. I don't know if you want to jump in there, Frank, or not.
No. So
no, that's good. Okay. So phase ratios is an important element, and it's important to the athlete because again, you know, if they put too much effort into one phase opposed to another, right, that always almost certainly, right, destroys the jump and make that jump less optimum than it should be. So we talked about we talked about a little bit about the conservation of momentum there. So after you conserve your momentum, you're now actually into that part which is now called the takeoff. Yeah, and so here we are, right? We take off, you know, takeoff angle for the hop, the step, and the jump. Now, as we can see, right, the hop takeoff is round about 15 to 18 degrees, and opposed to maybe the 19 to 26 degree that long jumpers would do. Now, this is because the jumper needs to preserve as much speed as they can going into that first takeoff. A flatter hop needs less vertical impulse. Less vertical impulse will leave more horizontal velocity for the hop, yeah? And so that's why the jumpers go for a flatter hop, because for the triple jumper, taking velocity across the board into that first phase is super, super important. The takeoff angle for the step is approximately 13 to 15 degrees, which also then makes the step the smallest phase of the three phases in the triple jump. Now, again, reasons are, now if we think about it, the hop landing is the most difficult phase to compete in the triple jump. It is the most difficult phase because the jumper is taking off on one leg and landing on that same leg. Yeah, so those are two reasons why the step phase is then possibly lower than the hop. The other reason as well is that the combination of a higher takeoff speed and a steeper takeoff angle means that there's a lot of load for the jumper to experience going into that step takeoff. And so generally, that's the reason why the step angle is what it is. Plus the athlete is just trying to go forward. The jump phase, as we can see, right, it's more or less what it would be in a long jump. Yeah, again, because the jumper is trying to take off there with maximal efforts. Yeah, and so they achieve takeoff angles much more in line with long jump with a long jump takeoff than the general triple jump phases that we normally see. Anything that you need to go in there, Frank?
No, carry on.
Okay. Now we get to that point in the presentation, right, where we're actually looking at the jump phase and we're looking at the technique to do with that. Because we know that both male and female triple jumpers will typically use a sail or a hang. And I'm not going to sort of show you a sail or a hang. You know what a sail or a hang is. To sort of land in the pit. Now, the aim of the landing is to minimize the loss of distance. And I say this because the predicted landing distance is determined by the parabolic flight of the athlete's center of mass. Now, the prediction of that parabolic flight is always further than the actual distance achieved. Therefore, the jumper must attempt to place their feet as close as possible to the contact point at where the parabolic flight would have landed. And then they just fight to get the rest of their body beyond that point. Now, if we look at Christian Telly here, we can say the position of the trunk is especially important during the landing. Because as we can see, right, Christian's actually leaning forward here. Yeah, and because he's leaning forward, this causes his leg to shift upwards. Yeah, and just to show you, right, this is based in mechanics. So if we go to that slide, right, the action of the torso going forward actually produces a reaction of the leg being lifted. Yep. Yeah. So there's a mechanical reasons for getting and for getting into that position where the torso comes to the chest, or should I say, the torso comes to the thigh. Now, this causes an increase in the flight time, because what happens as the leg lifts, yeah, they actually buys themselves a little bit more time before, to travel along that parabolic flight before they actually have to hit the sandpit. Now, there's another bit of physics here which actually helps us. Now, the physics and biomechanics also tells us that if the athlete lands in a position where the trunk is erect, so now let's turn Christian around and we have his trunk now much more upright. That causes the opposite effect of what we're talking about here. Yeah, because if he straightens his trunk, what will happen is that his leg will drop. So for me, and this is again, right, so I'm probably putting my flavor on this now a little bit. For me, the perfect strategy, therefore, for landing is to employ the two strategy. Yeah, basically, flex your torso, which then lifts the legs. That buys you a little bit of time. And then just before you actually hit the sandpit, you then straighten up, and then that pushes the leg a little bit further away from your center of mass. And both those action then gives you the maximal distance. Now, without actually talking about how the athlete comes out the sandpit, whether or not they do a scoop through or they come out to the side or whatever it is, those are things that we can probably talk about later on. In some of the other webinars when we actually come to really dissect what a landing should be. But it's important to actually talk here about it, because in London we can see that between Christian and Christian Taylor and Clay, yeah, Christian had lost two centimeters on his landing, whereas Clay lost 11 centimeters. But guess what? Clay lost the gold medal by 5 centimeters. So if he's a little bit more efficient on his landing, he probably effectively, right, he probably could have jumped 2 or 3 centimeters further than Christian Taylor. So the landing, getting the landing right is important. And certainly Clay didn't get it as right as he probably should have done on the day. Now, at this point, right, I think I've actually gone through the hop, the step, and the jump in terms of the technical imperatives that needs to be done. And at this point, either Frank wants to jump in or Darren wants to come back in on the conversation. And we go to questions.
If that trunk is lifted a bit too early, you get over rotation. So you find that
backward rotation. Yeah. And so you're going to leave that until it's late.
Yes.
So literally, right, almost just before they actually hit the sandpit.
Yeah.
The trunk straightens up, and that just pushes the foot a little bit further along the path.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Darren, how am I doing? How are we doing?
We're doing well. I think we've maximized the time that we've got. So there are 1 or 2 questions, and hopefully more will start coming in shortly. Guys, firstly, thanks for that presentation. Excellent. And I think that really tees us up quite nicely for the next sequence of webinars that will come, where hopefully that will give us a nice overview of the event and some of the things to think about and how that might affect our training. In the next series of webinars, we'll look into each of these areas into more detail. What does that look like for your training? So hopefully we've set the scene really nicely. I think for us now is to kind of quickly go over to questions. And we've got a really good question to start with from Gasper. So brilliant stuff, guys. Do you think that and this is relation to the maximum knee flexion we're talking about, Aston. Do you think that the lower amortization in women, so that shorter, that
higher,
lower knee bend at the step and the jump, be related to the lower horizontal velocities? Because I would suspect that the relative strength may not be such different between the men and women in relation to body weight. So maybe they can hold it better. So do women lose also less horizontal velocity in the phases?
Okay, I mean, I'll take that one from to start with, Frank, and then maybe you can jump in. So what I would say about that is that I think there's a few studies that seem to be suggesting that women aren't as good plyometrically as men. But again, right, you have studies that sort of disagree with one another as they go. Certainly, right, I would agree that generally, in terms of strengths, the strengths between men and women is going to be relative. Yeah, if we look at their body weight, but a couple of the reasons that I was thinking is possibly, I think the women come in at a slightly probably a lower trajectory, or should I say a lower velocity than men, but also right, they do have a slightly different technique. So for definite, when it comes to the step landing, the female athletes tend to have they tend to swing a straighter leg into the step. Because they swing a straighter leg into the step, it does mean that that step leg tends to land a little bit straighter and stiffer than the guys. Yeah? And so because they land straighter and stiffer, it probably means that they overcome eccentric forces much earlier and then get into the next bit a little bit quicker. But the guys are able to produce much more force the way they do it, though. That would be my answer. I don't know whether or not Frank has one.
No, I tend to agree with you, but I never ever coach any of my athletes to jump with almost a straight leg in the step.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah.
So I think it depends on the coach. But
yeah, it does. Let me just jump in there a little bit, Frank, right? Because right, I think Frank and I, right, are similar in a number of ways. In that, right, we actually don't agree with the way that women jumpers generally jump at the moment. Yeah, we actually think that they should jump much more like the guys. Yeah. And if they did jump like the guys, right, then maybe we'll see a difference. But sorry, Frank, I did jump in there. But
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was just going to say that. So I've always coached any of the girls that I work with to jump like a man. So not straight-legged in the step. So again, getting that folding effect and maximizing the step. Yeah, I coach differently. But if you look at the Eastern Bloc, if you look at the Russians, if you go back to typical Lebedeva, she just used to just open up. It suited their strength, and you need a lot of strength and resilience to overcome that kind of force.
Yeah, and if we also look at the video that we showed of Kravats, you look at her in the step. Yeah, she just stuck that leg out there, mate.
Yeah,
but you have to be super strong to get away with that. Yeah. And certainly, right, we don't have women that have that kind of strength. The last part of the question was, do women lose less horizontal velocity through the phases? It's more or less the same as the guys. Yeah, they lose it at the same rate as guys do, really.
Cool. I mean, for me, looking at the maximum knee flexion angles, I think if you've got a greater angle, you're going to much in a stronger position to absorb those forces. Where there's more knee bend, there's more risk of that collapse. So I think it's probably it's an affordance for them for them to progress and carry that speed through the phases to get that tight angle. That would be my tuppence worth on that.
Yeah, and it's much more a technical thing than I think it's a physical thing.
Okay.
I mean, although right, once we fix the technique, then it becomes a physical thing.
Cool. Okay. We've got next question. What is the phase ratio of elite jumpers in the modern trend? And I think it's maybe just revisiting the stuff of the last championships, because that's fairly modern, isn't it? The phase ratio.
Yeah, I mean, we can see that there's normally about 2 guys in the final that will probably do a jump dominant phase. The majority seems to be in and around balanced, and then you get a couple to maybe 4 who are hop dominant. But for me, I almost don't want to. You don't want to build your athlete based on the dominant phase ratio of this moment. So, for instance, right, someone like Christian Taylor gets away with a jump dominant phase distribution because he has great speed. Yeah, that's how it works. So literally, you will normally build your phase ratio in and around the characteristics that the athlete has. So if I try to build a jump dominant ratio with, let's say, someone like Phil Iduru, he wouldn't be the athlete that he became. Phil needed to be a hop dominant athlete because that suited his build, his style, and his qualities, basically. So you build phase ratio in and around the quality of the athlete rather than actually look at what's good at the moment.
Cool. Excellent.
I tend to go for a balance whenever I can. I don't think I've had any athlete. I think Larry was
He was hop dominant, wasn't he?
He was hop dominant. But we try to get at that. So you're looking at, 35, 36% hop dominant and about 20, 25, 26 for the step. And jump's always greater. Most of the guys about 30, 38, 39%.
Okay, cool. We have one more question, and I think we'll wrap it up there unless anyone sneaks one in. From Dominic, do either of the presenters consider the counter twist of hips and shoulders as a factor affecting performance at each contact? And if you do, is this coached primarily through strength conditioning or other activities?
I've never come across this, Dominic.
Right, so I'm reading through the question, right? So I'm assuming, right, that counter twisting means the counter twisting of the hip. So I mean, one leg's forward, the other leg is back. I mean, is that what he means? And then the opposite, and then the contra movement, which has to happen at the shoulders. Take this one for me, please, Darren, if you can.
If you have a single arm action, Dominic has followed up with if you have a arm action. So it'll be the rotation over the hip as it made contact with the ground. Is that
okay? Right. So I mean, I'm going to take a stab at it, right? And actually just basically say that because the triple jump is a single leg activity. Yeah, there's always going to be counter movements going on, which is why initially we talk about the biomotor abilities that the athlete needs to develop, that the athlete needs strength. They also need balance, they need coordination, they need rhythm and all those things. But the most important thing about those twisting type movements of upper and lower balance, one, right, is that they counter each other. That's the first thing. The second thing is how the torso is attached to the hip, which now becomes a strength and conditioning activity to try and eliminate or to counter any loss of energy. So through the link between the torso and the hip. But there has to be, if you're doing a single arm action, there has to be counter movement. There has to be twisting. The body has to find equilibrium somewhere.
So to achieve that balance. So again, is that something that you coach, or is that just an effect of the event? You minimize.
I mean, if someone is overdoing something, you basically you have to take that into consideration. But every triple jump is a triple jump of one, even if they did it 1,000,000 times. Something different happens on every contact. The counterclockwise movement of the hip and the shoulder, I don't think anything should be over exaggerated. Yeah, everything has to be in balance. Yeah, and I think we use biomechanics to help us keep things in balance. So, for instance, if an athlete overrode counter movement, so the arm moves across the body too far, we know that there's going to be a twist of the body in the opposite direction from the back. That is not good because the athlete's trying to go in a straight line. So we're always trying to work with, okay, these actions, these oscillations, let's call it that, has to happen. But let's keep them within balance of what we know the event needs.
Minimal. It becomes minimal because you go back and you look at the videos and you work on strength and conditioning to literally balance it. Because every time an athlete goes off course and twists, they are losing distance. Yeah. The more time you spend trying to balance yourself, the more distance you lose. So you've got to try and minimize it. And to me, this sounds like a strength issue if one of your athletes has got that problem.
Or it could be just an overemphasis. So you should imagine if an athlete do a big hop, normally, right, that's going to send them to one side of the runway than if they did it in a submaximal way. Yeah, so it's difficult you have to be the coach at the moment, right, then to sort that one out.
Yeah. Okay. One final question's come in, and then I think we'll wrap it up there for this evening, and then we can crack on to the next series. When looking at conversational speed, can it be that an athlete use limbs to actually generate acceleration from the hop to the final landing in the sand? So can they actually get conservation? Can they actually get faster through the phases through the use of limbs?
Well, it's impossible.
You look
as soon as they touch the ground, right? As soon as they touch the ground, physics takes over.
Decelerate.
Yeah.
I think what you can do is with good coordination and rhythm and timing that we've been talking about, we can minimize the deceleration, but you are going to get deceleration. The fastest point you are is when you have that toe off at the takeoff.
That's deceleration is inevitable. There's nothing you can do to stop that. What you have to do is basically be quick off the ground. So if you look at Jonathan Edwards, he literally floats on the ground. Minimal contact with the whole foot. Yeah.
The only way that I would see acceleration is if you're starting from zero, like a standing triple.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that would be the only thing. Yeah, I mean, but just to maybe take it to that next level for Richard, yeah, in that strength plays a part in all of this. Yeah, so again, just coming back to Jonathan Edwards, because Jonathan is able to land close to his center of mass, put his foot down at touchdown, close to the center of mass. It also means that his swing leg, the trail leg, is also closer to that landing leg, which means that it comes through much earlier than it would do for any other athlete. Yeah, but then you have to have the strength to be able to handle that force that Jonathan Edwards then has to handle. Yeah, so so the technique and the biomotor abilities have to coordinate and work together.
Yeah, cool, great. Well, listen, I think that is us, guys. Listen, thank you very much, Aston and Frank, for the presentation this evening. And thanks to everyone for listening in and asking the questions tonight. We will be back in a couple of weeks, and we will be looking at the approach for both long and triple jump. So we're looking at the first element, as mentioned this evening from Aston, looking at horizontal velocity is key, speed is king, into horizontal jumps. So we will be back here in a couple of weeks looking at that. So again, guys, thank you very much.